The crack of a gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Colorado Territory as Rebecca Olsen clutched her late husband's Bible to her chest, tears streaming down her face. It was 1876, and the world she had known for the past 8 years had shattered in an instant. Thomas Olsen, her beloved husband, lay 6 feet under in the cemetery of Aurora, leaving her alone with their 5-year-old son, a struggling ranch, and memories that cut like the sharpest knife. "Damn it all," she whispered, her knuckles white against the worn leather binding of the Bible. The book had been Thomas's most cherished possession, given to him by his father before they'd made the journey west from Pennsylvania. Now it was all she had left of him, besides the gold band that still adorned her finger and their beautiful boy who had his father's eyes. Rebecca stood at the edge of their property, watching as 3 riders approached from the distance. She recognized them immediately, neighboring ranchers coming to pay respects, no doubt, or perhaps to make offers on her land. They all assumed she couldn't manage on her own. Maybe they were right. "Miss Becky," called out Samuel Jenkins, the oldest of the 3 men. "We're awful sorry about Thomas. A finer man never walked this earth." Rebecca nodded, unable to find words as the men dismounted. She'd been widowed for exactly 2 weeks now, and each day felt like an eternity. "We were wondering," Samuel continued, removing his hat and twisting it nervously in his hands, "if you'd given any thought to your situation. Land like yours, it's too much for a woman alone." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, his silhouette growing larger as he neared the ranch. Rebecca didn't recognize the man or his mount, a magnificent chestnut stallion that seemed to float across the prairie grass. The stranger pulled up several yards away, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent under the harsh western sun. "Afternoon," he said, his voice deep and calm. "Name's Quentin Xavier. I was told in town that Thomas Olsen's widow might be in need of a ranch hand." Rebecca studied the stranger, taking in his worn leather chaps, the twin colts strapped to his hips, and the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from him. There was something about his eyes, a kindness there, despite the hardness of his jawline. "Who told you that?" Rebecca asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Reverend Mills," Quentin replied. "Said you might be needing help, what with the ranch and all. I'm looking for honest work, madam." Nothing more. The 3 ranchers exchanged glances, clearly displeased by this unexpected development. Samuel cleared his throat. "Now, Miss Becky, you hardly know this man. We're offering to take the burden off your hands completely." Rebecca looked down at the Bible in her hands, running her fingers over Thomas's name embossed on the cover. She knew what the ranchers were really offering, pennies on the dollar for land that Thomas had worked himself to the bone to develop. "Mr. Xavier," she said finally, meeting the stranger's gaze, "I can offer room and board plus $20 a month. It's not much, but it's what I can afford." Quentin nodded, a slight smile crossing his features. "That'll do just fine, Mrs. Olsen." The ranchers departed shortly after, their offers rebuffed for the time being. Rebecca watched them go, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake in trusting her livelihood to a man she'd known for less than 10 minutes. "Your boy," Quentin said as they walked toward the modest ranch house. "How's he taking it?" Rebecca sighed. "Henry's confused, keeps asking when his pa is coming home." Her voice broke slightly. "I don't know how to make him understand." As they reached the porch, the front door flew open and little Henry raced out, his dark hair tousled and his cheeks flushed. He stopped short at the sight of Quentin, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you a real cowboy?" he asked, staring up at the tall stranger, Quentin crouched down to meet the boy at eye level, his expression softening. "Yes, sir, I reckon I am. My pa was a cowboy too," Henry declared proudly. "But he's in heaven now." Rebecca felt her throat tighten as she watched Quentin's response. "Is that so?" Quentin said gently. "Well, he must have been a mighty fine one to have such a fine son." Henry beamed, then noticed the Bible in his mother's hands. "That's Pa's book," he said, pointing. "Mama reads it every night and cries." Rebecca felt her face flush with embarrassment, but Quentin didn't seem to judge. Instead, he stood and addressed Henry with genuine kindness. "Your ma is going to be just fine, young man. And I'm here to help with the ranch so she doesn't have to do everything herself." That night, after Henry was tucked into bed, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table with Quentin, explaining the ranch operations. Thomas had built up a modest herd of cattle and maintained fields of hay and alfalfa. It wasn't the biggest spread in Colorado territory, but it had been enough to sustain them. "The mortgage is paid," Rebecca explained. "Thomas made sure of that, but without him to manage the cattle and crops." She trailed off, the enormity of her situation washing over her anew. "We'll manage," Quentin assured her. "First light tomorrow, I'll ride out and take stock of what needs doing." Rebecca nodded, grateful yet wary. "Why did you really come here, Mr. Xavier? Surely there are better-paying jobs for a man with your skills." Quentin was quiet for a moment, contemplating his coffee cup. "I've been drifting for years, Mrs. Olsen. Seen my share of trouble and caused some too. Thought maybe it was time to put down some roots, do some good." He met her gaze steadily. "The Reverend spoke highly of your husband. Said he was a God-fearing man who built something worth preserving." Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes again. "He was," she whispered, clutching the Bible that never seemed to leave her hands these days. "He truly was." The days that followed established a new routine at the Olsen ranch. Quentin rose before dawn, tending to the horses and cattle, mending fences, and seeing to 100 other tasks that had begun to fall into disrepair after Thomas's death. Rebecca focused on the house, the garden, and caring for Henry, though she often joined Quentin in the fields when her son was napping. A month passed, then two. The summer heat blazed across the Colorado plains, but the ranch was thriving under Quentin's capable hands. Rebecca found herself watching him more often than she cared to admit the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he worked. The patience he showed with Henry, who followed him around like a shadow. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Rebecca found Quentin on the porch, whittling a small wooden horse. "For Henry?" she asked, sitting beside him. Quentin nodded. "Boy needs toys. Figured I could make him a whole herd eventually." Rebecca smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. "He adores you, talks about you constantly when you're out with the cattle." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the rhythmic sound of Quentin's knife against the wood and the distant lowing of cattle. "You still read it every night?" Quentin asked softly, gesturing to the Bible that sat on her lap. Rebecca's hand automatically moved to cover the book protectively. "Yes," she admitted. It makes me feel close to him." Quentin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Loss like that, it doesn't just go away." "Did you lose someone?" Rebecca asked, surprised by her own boldness. Quentin's hands stilled. "My wife and daughter. 7 years ago, cholera took them both within days of each other." Rebecca's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." "Sarah was 22. Our Emma was just 2. His voice was steady, but Rebecca could hear the pain beneath the words. "Thought I'd never survive it, spent years running from the memories." "And now?" she asked. Quentin resumed his whittling, his movements deliberate. "Now I'm here," he said simply. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Rebecca found herself thinking about Quentin's revelation long into the night. It explained so much about him, the sadness that sometimes shadowed his eyes, the gentle way he interacted with Henry, the understanding he seemed to have for her grief. As summer gave way to autumn, Rebecca realized that the raw wound of Thomas's death was slowly healing. She still held his Bible close, still spoke to him in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, but the crushing weight of grief had begun to lift. And in its place, something else had started to grow, something unexpected and frightening in its intensity. She found herself looking forward to the sound of Quentin's boots on the porch steps, to the deep rumble of his laugh when Henry said something precocious, to the moments when their hands would brush accidentally as they worked side by side. It filled her with guilt and confusion. How could she feel this way when Thomas had been gone less than 6 months? One crisp October morning, Rebecca was hanging laundry when she saw riders approaching the same 3 ranchers who had come calling after Thomas's death. She tensed, knowing they hadn't given up on acquiring her land. Quentin emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He stood beside Rebecca as the men rode up, his presence reassuring. "Miss Becky," Samuel greeted her, tipping his hat. His eyes flickered to Quentin with barely concealed disdain. "We've come with a new proposition for you." Rebecca straightened her spine. "I'm not selling, Samuel. The ranch is doing just fine." Samuel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Is it now? Because word in town is that your cattle herd is dwindling. Winter's coming and it'll be a hard one according to the almanac." "Our herd is healthy," Quentin interjected calmly, "and we've put up plenty of hay for winter." Samuel's eyebrow arched. Interesting choice of words for a hired hand. He turned back to Rebecca. "People are talking, Becky. A widow living alone with a strange man, it's not proper." Rebecca felt her face flush with anger. "What I do on my property is none of your concern, Samuel Jenkins." The atmosphere grew tense as the men exchanged heated words. Eventually, the ranchers departed, but not before Samuel called over his shoulder. Thomas would be mighty disappointed to see his widow carrying on with a drifter before his body's even cold in the ground. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She stood frozen until Quentin gently touched her elbow. "Don't let them get to you," he said. "They're just trying to force your hand." But the damage was done. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep, torn between her growing feelings for Quentin and her loyalty to Thomas. She found herself on the porch in the pre-dawn hours, clutching Thomas's Bible and sobbing quietly. She didn't hear Quentin approach until he spoke. "Mrs. Olsen, Rebecca." She turned, mortified to be caught in such a vulnerable state. "I'm sorry if I woke you," she managed, wiping at her tears. Quentin sat beside her on the porch step, respectfully keeping some distance between them. "You didn't." He was silent for a long moment before continuing. "What Samuel said yesterday, it's been bothering you." It wasn't a question, but Rebecca nodded anyway. "I feel like I'm betraying Thomas," she whispered. "He's only been gone 6 months and I—" She couldn't finish the thought. Quentin looked out at the darkness. "When Sarah died, an old preacher told me something I've never forgotten. He said, the heart doesn't know time. It knows only love and the absence of it." Rebecca considered his words, her fingers tracing the embossed letters on the Bible's cover. "I think," Quentin continued carefully, "that Thomas would want you to be happy, to live, not just to exist. How can you know that?" Rebecca asked, her voice breaking. "Because that's what love is," Quentin said simply. "Wanting the best for someone even when you're not there to see it." She held the Bible closer to her chest, tears flowing freely now. "I still love him, I always will." Quentin's voice was gentle when he finally spoke. "It's all right. He knows you still love him." The words washed over Rebecca, granting her a permission she hadn't realized she was seeking. She looked up at Quentin, seeing in his eyes a reflection of her own complicated emotions: grief, hope, longing. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and covered her hand with his own. They sat there in silence as the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky. The following weeks brought a new awareness between them, a careful dance of growing affection tempered by respect for what had come before. They never spoke directly of their feelings, but Rebecca found herself smiling more, laughing at Quentin's dry humor, allowing herself to imagine a future beyond grief. Henry, with a child's intuition, seemed to sense the change. One evening, as Quentin was teaching him to play checkers, he looked up and announced, "I think Mama likes you, Mr. Quentin." Rebecca nearly dropped the plate she was drying, mortified by her son's candor, but Quentin merely smiled and moved his checker piece. "Is that so?" he asked, his eyes finding Rebecca's across the room. "Well, I think your mama is a pretty special lady." Henry considered this, his small face serious. "Pa's in heaven now, so maybe you could stay with us forever and be my new pa." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca felt her heart hammering in her chest as she waited for Quentin's response. "That's a mighty big question, Henry," Quentin said carefully, "and one that would be up to your mama." All eyes turned to Rebecca, who felt caught in a moment that seemed suspended in time. Before she could formulate a response, there was a pounding at the door. Quentin rose immediately, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. "Stay here," he instructed, moving to the window to peer out into the darkness. His body language changed instantly, tension radiating from his shoulders. "It's Jenkins and his men. They're armed." Fear coursed through Rebecca as she pulled Henry close. "What do they want?" "Nothing good," Quentin replied grimly. "Take Henry to the back room and stay there." The pounding continued, along with Samuel's voice slurred with alcohol. "Come out, Xavier." "We know what you are." Quentin's face had gone pale. "Rebecca, listen to me. No matter what happens or what you hear, stay hidden." He pressed something into her hand, a folded piece of paper. "If anything happens to me, take this to Sheriff Miller in Aurora." Before she could protest, he ushered her and Henry toward the back of the house, then returned to the front door. Rebecca huddled with her son in the bedroom, listening as Quentin opened the door and stepped onto the porch, closing it behind him. The voices outside were muffled, but the tension in them was clear. Rebecca strained to hear, catching fragments of the conversation. "Wanted in 3 territories. Reward for your capture. Murdered those men in cold blood." Her blood ran cold. What were they saying about Quentin? It couldn't be true. The gentle man who had carved toys for her son, who had worked tirelessly to save her ranch, who looked at her with such tenderness, he couldn't be a murderer. A shot rang out, followed by the sounds of a scuffle. Henry whimpered, burying his face in her skirts. Rebecca's heart raced as she clutched Thomas's Bible in one hand and Quentin's mysterious paper in the other. Unable to stand the uncertainty any longer, she placed Henry on the bed. "Stay here, sweetheart. Don't move until Mama or Mr. Quentin comes for you." She crept to the front of the house, peering out the window. What she saw made her gasp. Quentin on his knees, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, surrounded by Samuel and 4 other men. One of them held a wanted poster. "Quentin Xavier," Samuel was saying, his voice carrying clearly now. "Wanted for the murder of 3 men in Wyoming territory. Reward of $500, dead or alive." He leveled his pistol at Quentin's head. "Guess which way is easier for us?" Rebecca didn't think. She grabbed Thomas's shotgun from above the fireplace and burst through the front door. "Get off my property," she shouted, raising the weapon. All heads turned toward her. Quentin's eyes widened in alarm. "Rebecca, go back inside," Samuel laughed. "Look here, boys." The widow's defending her murderer. His expression hardened. "You don't know who you're harboring, Becky. This man is a killer." Rebecca kept the shotgun steady. "I don't believe you." "It's true," Quentin said quietly. "The wanted poster is real." Rebecca felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet, but she kept the gun raised. "I don't care. You'll not lynch a man on my property. If he's wanted, take him to the sheriff." Samuel sneered. "Since when did you grow such a backbone, Becky? First you refuse our generous offers for this worthless piece of land. Now you're pointing guns at decent men to protect a murderer." His eyes narrowed. Thomas must be rolling in his grave. The mention of her husband's name strengthened Rebecca's resolve. Thomas believed in justice, not vigilante violence. "Now get off our land before I put a hole in you, Samuel Jenkins." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Samuel slowly lowered his pistol. "Fine. We'll take him to Sheriff Miller. But don't think this is over, Becky. That land will be ours one way or another." The men hauled Quentin to his feet, binding his hands with rope. As they led him to their horses, he managed to catch Rebecca's eye. "The paper," he said urgently. "Read it." Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading into the night, leaving Rebecca alone with the shotgun still clutched in trembling hands and 1,000 questions racing through her mind. Inside, she found Henry exactly where she'd left him, his eyes wide with fear. "Where's Mr. Quentin?" Rebecca sat beside him, gathering him close. "Some men took him away for a while, but he'll be back." She hoped she wasn't lying to her son. After Henry finally fell asleep, Rebecca unfolded the paper Quentin had given her. It was a letter, written in a neat, precise hand. "Rebecca, if you're reading this, then my past has caught up with me. The wanted poster is real, but the story behind it isn't what they claim. 3 years ago, I killed 3 men in Wyoming. They had attacked a family of settlers, murdered the father, assaulted the mother, and were about to do worse to their teenage daughter when I intervened. I shot them without warning or mercy, and I've never regretted it. The local magistrate was the uncle of one of those men. He issued the warrant, painting me as a cold-blooded killer. I've been running ever since. The truth is in a letter I sent to the territorial governor last month, along with sworn statements from the mother and daughter. I was hoping for a pardon before anyone discovered who I was. I guess time ran out. I never meant to bring danger to your door. These past months with you and Henry have been the closest thing to peace I've known since I lost my family. Whatever you decide to believe about me, please know that my feelings for you have been true from the start." Rebecca read the letter 3 times, her heart racing. She believed him. Every instinct told her that the man she had come to know, the man she had come to love, was no cold-blooded murderer. At first light, she saddled her horse, left Henry with her elderly neighbor Mrs. Peterson, and rode hard for Aurora. The town was just waking up when she arrived, tying her horse outside the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, his face weathered and his eyes shrewd. He looked up from his desk as Rebecca burst in. "Mrs. Olsen," he greeted her. "I expected you might show up." "Where is he?" she demanded, still breathless from her ride. Miller gestured toward the cells in the back. "Locked up safe and sound. Jenkins and his boys brought him in last night, talking about reward money and murder charges." He studied her face. "You want to tell me your side of this story?" Rebecca handed him Quentin's letter. "This is the truth," she said firmly. Miller read it slowly, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he handed it back to her. "Interesting tale, could be true." "It is true," Rebecca insisted. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Maybe so. But a wanted poster is official business, Mrs. Olsen. I've wired the authorities in Wyoming territory. Until I hear back, Mr. Xavier stays in my jail. May I see him?" she asked, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. Miller considered her for a long moment, then nodded. 5 minutes. Quentin was sitting on a narrow cot when she approached the cell. He stood quickly when he saw her, moving to the bars that separated them. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "What about Henry? He's safe with Mrs. Peterson," Rebecca assured him. "I read your letter." Quentin's eyes searched hers. "And I believe you," she said simply. Relief washed over his features. He reached through the bars to touch her hand. "Rebecca, I never wanted to bring this trouble to you. If I could take it all back—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't say you regret coming to Aurora, to our ranch. I don't." She gripped his hand tightly. "We'll fight this, Quentin. I'll speak to the Reverend, gather character witnesses. Sheriff Miller has wired Wyoming. Once they hear your side, Rebecca," he said gently, "the magistrate who issued the warrant is a powerful man, and even if what I did was justified, I still killed 3 men." She refused to accept his defeat. "Then we'll appeal to the governor ourselves. I'll sell cattle if I need to, hire a proper attorney." Quentin's thumb stroked the back of her hand. "Why would you do all this for me?" Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "Because I love you," she said, the words both terrifying and liberating. "And because Thomas would have done the same thing if he'd been in your position." Before Quentin could respond, Sheriff Miller appeared. "Time's up, Mrs. Olsen." Rebecca reluctantly released Quentin's hand. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised. "With the Reverend." True to her word, Rebecca returned the next day with Reverend Mills, who vouched for Quentin's character during his time in Aurora. The day after that, she brought Mrs. Peterson and 2 other respected townspeople who had interacted with Quentin over the past months. For a week, she split her time between the ranch and the jail, bringing Quentin fresh clothes and home-cooked meals, updating him on Henry and the cattle, and planning their legal strategy. She even brought Thomas's Bible one day, reading from Psalms as Quentin listened from his cell. On the 8th day, Sheriff Miller received a telegram from Wyoming Territory. Rebecca was present when he read it, her heart in her throat. "Well," Miller said, looking up from the paper, "seems your Mr. Xavier has some powerful friends after all. The territorial governor has reviewed his case and issued a full pardon." He smiled slightly at Rebecca's gasp of joy. "Appears the mother and daughter he saved have been campaigning on his behalf for some time. Their statements, along with evidence that the magistrate falsified the warrant out of personal vendetta, convinced the governor." Rebecca could hardly believe what she was hearing. "He's free to go," Miller nodded, already reaching for the cell keys. "Free and clear. No reward, no charges." Minutes later, Quentin walked out of the jail a free man, blinking in the bright sunlight. Rebecca threw herself into his arms, not caring who saw or what they might think. "It's over," she whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You're free." Quentin held her tightly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Because of you, you never gave up." They rode back to the ranch together, Rebecca filling him in on everything that had happened during his absence. Henry was overjoyed to see Quentin, running to him the moment they arrived and refusing to leave his side for the rest of the day. That evening, after Henry was asleep, they sat on the porch steps, where they had shared so many conversations over the months. The air between them was charged with possibility. "When I said I loved you," Rebecca began hesitantly, "in the jail cell—" "I know," Quentin interrupted softly. "It was the moment, the situation." "You don't have to know," she said firmly. "It wasn't just the moment, I meant it. I still mean it." She took a deep breath. "But that doesn't mean I've stopped loving Thomas. I don't think I ever will." Quentin reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. "I would never ask you to. Thomas is part of you, part of Henry. He always will be." Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, the familiar weight of Thomas's Bible in her lap. "When I was a little girl, my mother told me that the heart is like a garden. You can plant new flowers without uprooting the ones already growing there." Quentin smiled at the metaphor. "Wise woman, your mother." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the velvet sky. Finally, Quentin spoke, his voice thoughtful. "You know, when I first came here, I was just looking for a place to hide, to disappear for a while. I never expected." He trailed off, searching for words. "I never expected to find a home again. A family." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "Is that what we are, a family?" Quentin turned to her, his eyes serious. "I'd like us to be, if you'll have me." He hesitated. "I know it might be too soon, and I'll understand if you need more time. But I love you, Rebecca Olsen. You and Henry both. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." Rebecca felt tears welling up again, but these were different from the tears of grief she had shed for so many months. These were tears of hope, of possibility, of love reborn from the ashes of loss. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." They were married in the small church in Aurora 2 months later, on a crisp December morning with snow dusting the ground. Henry stood proudly beside them, holding the rings on a small pillow sewn by Mrs. Peterson. Reverend Mills officiated, his kind face beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife. Rebecca wore a simple blue dress rather than traditional white, a quiet acknowledgement of her past marriage. And in her hands, she carried Thomas's Bible along with a small bouquet of winter holly. As they exchanged vows, Rebecca felt a profound sense of rightness wash over her. This wasn't a betrayal of Thomas's memory, but a continuation of the life he had helped her build, a life now enriched by Quentin's love. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the church hall, Rebecca found a quiet moment to step outside. The winter air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue. She opened the Bible, running her fingers over the familiar pages. "I hope you understand," she whispered to Thomas's memory. "I'll always love you. You gave me Henry, you gave me strength, you taught me how to love, and now that love continues." She felt a presence behind her and turned to find Quentin watching her, his eyes warm with understanding. "You all right?" he asked softly. Rebecca nodded, closing the Bible and holding it close to her heart. "Just saying goodbye, or maybe not goodbye, just acknowledging a change." Quentin stepped forward, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "He'll always be part of our family, Rebecca. I promise you that." She leaned into his embrace, grateful beyond words for the man who understood her so completely. As they stood there in the winter sunlight, Rebecca felt at peace for the first time since Thomas's death, a peace born not of forgetting, but of healing. Spring brought new life to the Olsen Xavier ranch. The cattle herd expanded, the fields flourished under Quentin's careful management, and Rebecca discovered she was expecting a child. Henry was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a big brother, talking endlessly about all the things he would teach the baby. They converted Thomas's old office into a nursery, keeping his desk and favorite chair as a reminder of the man who had started it all. Rebecca still kept his Bible on her nightstand, though she no longer clutched it like a lifeline. Now it was a comfort, a connection to a past that had shaped her but no longer defined her. Samuel Jenkins and his associates had retreated after Quentin's exoneration, their plans to acquire the ranch thwarted by the family's newfound stability. Occasionally, they encountered them in town, exchanging stiff nods but little else. As Rebecca's pregnancy progressed, Quentin became even more protective, often insisting on handling the more strenuous ranch chores himself. But Rebecca was no fragile flower, and she continued to work alongside him when she could, their partnership strengthening with each passing day. One warm evening in late July, they sat on the porch after Henry had gone to bed, watching a spectacular sunset paint the Colorado sky. Rebecca rested her hand on her rounded belly, feeling the baby kick. "Strong one," Quentin remarked, placing his hand beside hers. Just like his mother, Rebecca smiled, or her father. Quentin's expression grew thoughtful. I've been thinking about names. Oh, Rebecca raised an eyebrow. And what have you decided? Well, Quentin said carefully, if it's a boy, I thought maybe Thomas. Thomas Quentin Xavier. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. You'd want that? Quentin nodded. I would. It feels right. He met her gaze steadily. I never met the man, but I know he must have been extraordinary to have been loved by you so completely. I'd be honored to have our son carry his name. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as she leaned forward to kiss him. Thank you, she whispered against his lips. And if it's a girl? She asked when they separated. Quentin smiled. I thought maybe Sarah after my first wife, but only if you're comfortable with that. Rebecca considered it, then nodded slowly. Sarah Rebecca Xavier, it has a nice ring to it. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the ranch, each lost in thoughts of the past and dreams of the future. Rebecca felt the baby shift again and smiled, marveling at how life had come full circle, how loss had eventually led to renewal, how grief had transformed into a different kind of love. You ever wonder, she asked suddenly, if they can see us, Thomas and Sarah? Quentin considered the question seriously. I like to think they can, that they're at peace knowing we've found happiness again. Rebecca nodded, comforted by the idea. I used to worry that loving you somehow diminished what Thomas and I had, but now I understand that it doesn't work that way. Love multiplies, it doesn't divide. Wisest woman I know, Quentin said, kissing her temple. On a bright September morning, Sarah Rebecca Xavier entered the world with a robust cry that immediately endeared her to her father. She had Quentin's dark hair and Rebecca's delicate features, and Henry pronounced her perfect after a thorough examination. As Rebecca nursed her daughter in the bedroom that now belonged to her and Quentin, she felt a profound sense of contentment. Her family had been remade, not to replace what was lost, but to build something new and beautiful from the foundation that remained. Quentin sat beside them, his arm around Rebecca, gazing down at their daughter with wonder. She's magnificent, he whispered, just like her mother. Henry squeezed in beside them, eager to be part of every moment of his sister's life. Can I hold her again? He asked for the 5th time that day. Quentin helped position the baby in Henry's careful arms, guiding him on how to support her head. The sight of her son Thomas's son holding her daughter with Quentin filled Rebecca's heart to overflowing. That night, after the children were asleep, Rebecca and Quentin stood in the doorway of Sarah's room, watching her tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. Did you ever imagine we'd be here? Rebecca asked softly. When you rode up that day looking for work, Quentin shook his head. Never. I was just trying to outrun my past, find a quiet place to disappear for a while. He looked down at her, his eyes filled with love. Instead, I found a future. Rebecca leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. I was so lost after Thomas died. I couldn't imagine ever being happy again. She turned to face him fully. Thank you for showing me that life goes on, that love endures even through loss. We showed each other, Quentin corrected gently. The years that followed brought their share of challenges and joys. The ranch prospered under their joint management, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man with his father Thomas's gentle spirit and Quentin's strength. Sarah developed into a spirited girl with a keen mind and boundless energy. When Sarah was 3, Rebecca gave birth to a son they named James, after Quentin's father. The family was complete, a beautiful blend of past and present, of what had been lost and what had been found. Thomas's Bible remained a cherished possession, its pages now bearing inscriptions marking the births of Sarah and James, alongside the earlier notation of Henry's arrival. Rebecca still read from it regularly, finding comfort in the familiar words and in the connection it provided to the man who had first shown her the meaning of love. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Quentin surprised Rebecca with a special gift, a new family Bible, large and ornately bound, with the name Xavier embossed in gold on its leather cover. Inside, he had painstakingly recorded their family history, including Thomas and Sarah, honoring the complete tapestry of their lives. "For our future," he explained as Rebecca traced the family tree he had drawn. "So our children and grandchildren will know the whole story, how love can be lost and found, how families can be forged through both joy and sorrow." Rebecca kissed him, overcome with emotion. "It's perfect," she whispered, "just like the life we've built together." That night, as they lay in bed, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of grief to the heights of joy, from holding Thomas's Bible like a lifeline to embracing a future she could never have imagined in those dark days after his death. "What are you thinking about?" Quentin asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Rebecca smiled, turning to face the man who had helped her heart heal without asking her to forget. "I was thinking about that day when you found me crying on the porch, holding Thomas's Bible." "Do you remember what you said to me?" Quentin nodded, his expression softening. "I told you it was all right, that he knew you still loved him." "You understood even then," Rebecca said, marveling at the memory. "You understood that love doesn't end, it just transforms." Quentin pulled her closer. "I understood because I'd been through it myself, and because, even then, I was falling in love with you." Outside their window, the Colorado moon illuminated the ranch they had built together, a testament to resilience, to second chances, to the enduring power of love that transcends even death. Thomas's Bible rested on the nightstand beside the new family Bible, symbols of a life that honored the past while embracing the future. And as Rebecca drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she felt a profound peace, the peace of knowing that love, in all its forms, was the greatest blessing of all. 20 years later, the Xavier Ranch had grown into one of the largest and most prosperous in Colorado. Henry, now a young man of 25, managed much of the operation alongside Quentin, who at 53 still rode the range daily but was beginning to delegate more responsibilities. Sarah, a spirited young woman of 19, had recently married the local doctor's son, and 16-year-old James was showing a remarkable talent for breeding and training horses. Rebecca, her dark hair now streaked with silver, stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as riders approached from the direction of Aurora. She recognized them immediately, Henry returning from town with Sarah and her husband Michael, who had been visiting for Sunday dinner. "They're back," she called over her shoulder to Quentin, who was reading in the parlor. He joined her on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist with the easy familiarity of 20 years of marriage. "Good. James has been restless, waiting to show Sarah that new colt." Rebecca leaned against him, savoring the moment. These family gatherings were precious to her, especially now that Sarah had established her own household in town. "Can you believe how quickly they've grown?" she mused. "Seems like yesterday Henry was asking if you were a real cowboy." Quentin chuckled, the sound deep and warm. "And now he's negotiating cattle contracts like a seasoned pro." Pride colored his voice. "Thomas would be mighty proud of him." Rebecca nodded, her heart full. Over the years, Thomas had remained a presence in their family, not a ghost haunting them, but a cherished memory honored through stories and traditions. Henry, especially, had been raised to know both his fathers, the one who had given him life and the one who had helped raise him into manhood. The riders dismounted and Sarah rushed up the steps to embrace her mother. "Mama," "We've got news," she announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Michael, a tall young man with kind eyes, followed more sedately, nodding respectfully to Quentin. "Sir, madam." "Out with it then," Quentin prompted, grinning at his daughter's obvious joy. Sarah exchanged a glance with her husband, then blurted, "We're expecting. Come spring, you'll be grandparents." Rebecca gasped with delight, pulling Sarah into another embrace while Quentin shook Michael's hand vigorously. Henry stood to the side, smiling at his sister's happiness. "A baby," Rebecca exclaimed. "Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful news." The family moved inside, where James was instantly caught up in the excitement. Plans were made for the nursery, names were debated, and advice solicited and unsolicited flowed freely from Rebecca, who couldn't quite believe she was about to become a grandmother. That evening, after Sarah and Michael had returned to town and the boys had retired to their rooms, Rebecca and Quentin sat in the parlor, the lamp burning low. Thomas's Bible and the family Bible sat side by side on the bookshelf, physical reminders of their intertwined stories. "A grandchild," Rebecca said softly, still marveling at the news. "Another generation to add to our family tree." Quentin reached for her hand, his expression thoughtful. "I was thinking about that first year after Thomas passed, how uncertain everything was, how broken you were." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Look at us now, Becca. A thriving ranch, 3 wonderful children, and a grandchild on the way." Rebecca nodded, memories washing over her. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden up that day, if I'd sold the ranch to Samuel Jenkins." "You wouldn't have," Quentin said confidently. "You're too stubborn." His eyes twinkled with affection. "It's one of the things I've always loved about you." Rebecca laughed, acknowledging the truth in his words. She had been stubborn, holding onto the ranch when everyone said a widow couldn't manage it alone. That stubbornness had seen her through the darkest days of grief and led her, eventually, to the rich life she now enjoyed. "I think," she said slowly, "that Thomas somehow knew. That day when you found me on the porch with his Bible, when you said he knew I still loved him, I felt something shift inside me. Like I'd been given permission to live again, to love again." Quentin nodded. "I felt the same way about Sarah after she died. Like she was telling me it was okay to find happiness again." He looked at the family Bible, its pages now filled with births, marriages, and milestones. "Life is for the living, Becca." I think they both understood that. As they prepared for bed that night, Rebecca paused before the small framed photograph of Thomas that still hung in their bedroom, a concession Quentin had insisted on when they first married. "He's part of our story," Quentin had said. "He should have a place in our home." Now, touching the frame lightly, Rebecca whispered, "We're going to be grandparents, Thomas. Can you believe it?" She felt Quentin's presence behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. After 20 years, he still understood her need to include Thomas in significant moments, never threatened by the love she continued to hold for her first husband. "Come to bed, love," he said softly. "Tomorrow's going to be busy. James wants to start breaking that new stallion, and Henry mentioned something about expanding the north pasture." Rebecca turned into his embrace, marveling at how, even after all these years, her heart still quickened at his touch. They had weathered so much together: droughts and blizzards, market fluctuations, the challenges of raising 3 children. Through it all, their partnership had only strengthened, their love deepening with each passing year. "I love you, Quentin Xavier," she said, looking up into the face that had become as dear to her as her own reflection. "Thank you for our life together." "I love you more, Rebecca Xavier," he replied, the words a familiar refrain between them. "And I'd choose this life with you 1,000 times over." As spring approached, the entire Xavier family busied themselves preparing for the new addition. Rebecca and Quentin rode into Aurora weekly to check on Sarah, bringing supplies and offering help with the preparations. James crafted a beautiful wooden cradle. Henry contributed a rocking chair he'd commissioned from the town's carpenter. And Quentin surprised everyone by revealing a collection of tiny hand-carved animals he'd been working on secretly for months. "Every child needs a menagerie," he explained when Rebecca discovered him putting the finishing touches on a miniature buffalo. On a bright May morning, Michael appeared at the ranch, his horse lathered from hard riding. "It's time," he announced breathlessly. "Sarah's asking for you, Mrs. Xavier." Rebecca was in the wagon before Michael finished speaking, Quentin already reaching for the reins. They made the journey to town in record time, arriving to find Sarah in the capable hands of the midwife. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and as the sun set over the Colorado mountains, a robust cry announced the arrival of Thomas Michael Andrews, named for both his grandfathers. When Rebecca was finally allowed to see her daughter and grandson, she found herself overwhelmed with emotion. Sarah, exhausted but radiant, placed the tiny bundle in her mother's arms. "He looks like Henry did," Rebecca whispered, taking in the dark hair and delicate features. "Oh, Sarah, he's perfect." Later, as Quentin held his grandson for the first time, Rebecca watched the tenderness in his weathered face and thought about the full circle their lives had traveled. From loss and grief to joy and renewal. From a young widow clutching her dead husband's Bible to a grandmother watching her husband cradle their first grandchild. In that moment, she felt a profound gratitude for the journey, all of it, the sorrow as well as the joy, the endings as well as the beginnings. Each had shaped her, molded her into the woman she had become. That night in the guest room of Sarah and Michael's house, Rebecca and Quentin lay side by side discussing the events of the day. "He has Thomas's nose, don't you think?" Rebecca mused. "And your chin," Quentin chuckled. "Poor child, stuck with my chin." Rebecca playfully swatted his arm. "I love your chin. It's dignified." They fell silent, contemplating the miracle of new life and the continuation of their family line. Rebecca thought about Thomas, about how he would have loved being a grandfather. She had long ago stopped feeling guilty about such thoughts, understanding that keeping his memory alive was an act of love, not betrayal. "I was thinking," Quentin said after a while, "about that Bible of Thomas's. Maybe we should pass it down to little Thomas when he's older." Along with the stories of his namesake. Rebecca turned to him in the darkness, once again struck by the depth of his understanding. "You wouldn't mind, Quentin's voice was gentle. "Becca, it's our history, all of it, the sad parts and the happy parts. Little Thomas should know where he comes from, all the strands that wove together to create his family." Rebecca kissed him, her heart full of love for this man who had helped her rebuild her life, who had never asked her to forget, but had instead embraced the entirety of her past as part of their shared story. As the years continued to unfold, the Xavier Ranch prospered and expanded. Henry eventually married Julia, the schoolteacher from Aurora, and they built a house on the northern edge of the ranch property. James, always the adventurous one, spent several years working cattle drives across the territory before returning to the ranch with a wife from Denver and dreams of raising quarter horses. Thomas Michael Andrews grew into a curious, energetic boy who delighted in visits to his grandparents' ranch. By the time he was 5, Sarah and Michael had added a daughter to their family, and Henry and Julia had twins, a boy and a girl, who kept Rebecca and Quentin busier than they'd ever imagined grandparents could be. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food and decorated with wildflowers. Children raced through the grass, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze, while the adults reminisced and shared stories old and new. Rebecca, now in her early 60s but still vibrant, found a quiet moment amid the festivities to slip away to the small family cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. Thomas's grave was there, well tended and marked with a simple headstone. Over the years, other stones had been added. Quentin's parents, Rebecca's mother, a stillborn daughter Henry and Julia had lost in their second year of marriage. She placed a bouquet of fresh-cut flowers on Thomas's grave, then stood with her hand resting lightly on the cool stone. 30 years with Quentin today, she said softly. Can you believe it? Longer than you and I had together. She paused, looking out over the ranch that had grown so much from the modest operation Thomas had started. I think you would approve, Thomas, of the ranch, of the family we've built, of the life I've lived. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Quentin approaching, his hair now silver but his stride still strong and purposeful. Thought I might find you here, he said, coming to stand beside her, paying respects. Rebecca nodded, linking her arm through his. Remembering, giving thanks. Quentin understood without further explanation. After 3 decades together, they could communicate volumes in the spaces between words. The grandkids are asking where you've gone, he said after a moment. Young Thomas wants to show you the frog he caught in the creek. Rebecca smiled, picturing her grandson's earnest face. We should go back then. Wouldn't want to miss such an important discovery. As they walked arm in arm down the hill toward the celebration, Rebecca reflected on the long, winding path that had led her to this moment, a path marked by both profound sorrow and immeasurable joy. She had been a young bride, then a grieving widow clutching her husband's Bible like a lifeline. She had been a mother struggling to raise her son alone, a woman learning to open her heart again, a partner in building something lasting and meaningful. And now she was a grandmother, watching the next generation take up the threads of the story she and Quentin had woven together. Happy anniversary, my love, Quentin said as they neared the gathering, the sounds of laughter and conversation washing over them. Rebecca squeezed his arm, her heart full to overflowing. Happy anniversary. Thank you for 30 beautiful years. Here's to 30 more, he replied with a wink. Rebecca laughed, the sound merging with the joyful cacophony of their family celebration. I'll hold you to that, Quentin Xavier. As they rejoined the festivities, little Thomas ran up with his frog. Sarah called for everyone's attention to make a toast, and Henry's twins tried to sneak extra slices of cake. Rebecca stood in the midst of it all, Quentin's steady presence beside her, and thought about that long-ago moment on the porch when he had found her crying, clutching Thomas's Bible to her chest. It's all right, he had said. He knows you still love him. Those simple words had been a gift, permission to honor the past while embracing the future, to hold one love in her heart without diminishing the possibility of another. They had been the beginning of a healing journey that had led her here, to this moment of fullness and gratitude. Rebecca looked around at the family gathered before her, children and grandchildren, the living legacy of both her marriages. Thomas's Bible now sat in a place of honor in their home, alongside the family Bible that chronicled their continuing story. Both were treasured, both were true. As Quentin raised his glass to toast their anniversary, his eyes meeting hers with the same warmth and understanding that had drawn her to him all those years ago, Rebecca felt a sense of completion. Her life had not been the one she had imagined as a young bride, but it had been rich and meaningful, filled with love in all its complex, beautiful forms. And that, she reflected as she raised her own glass to join the toast, was the greatest blessing of all.